like to introduce you to Lee Keough. She's the editor-in-chief and founder of New Jersey Spotlight. She's an award-winning journalist and editor with over 25 years' experience. She started her career as a reporter on the Herald News and moved on to computer publications. Lee became editor-in-chief of TechWeb, a network of websites for IT professionals. Under her guidance, TechWeb was cited as one of the 3 most important by Advertising Age. And that's a well-known magazine that cites these wonderful, talented people. While editor-in-chief, Lee led Data Communications, a McGraw-Hill Company publication and website, to win more than 40 national awards for editorial excellence. She has served as editorial director of Telecom, the world's largest telecom trade show, which is sponsored by a division of the United Nations. In that capacity, Lee oversaw television programming and a daily newspaper. She's also co-founder and president of the Foresight Group, an editorial services company. So before I turn the program over to Lee, who will be the moderator for tonight, I also want to introduce you at this point to Krista Jenkins. She's Dr. Krista Jenkins, and she's a professor of political science at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where she's also the director of FDU's Survey Research Center, Public Mind. She's the author of numerous articles and books and a frequent broadcast and print commentator on politics in New Jersey and elsewhere. Dr. Jenkins is the co-author of A New Engagement, Political Participation, Civic Life, and Changing American Citizen, and the author of Mothers, Daughters, and Political Socialization. She's also co-authored Where Have All the Heroes Gone? Dr. Jenkins was recently named one of New Jersey's 50 top women in business by New Jersey Biz. So at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Lee, and I can tell you, before Lee takes over, that we have a list of questions that came in by email to NJPPN from a lot of the people in the network who are be here tonight and would like to have their questions answered, and they will be able to see it because we're videotaping this program. So thanks again for coming, and now, Lee.
Thank you, Rhoda. I'm going to have to cut down on that. Roughly the department sent in the bio sheet. We're going to have to cut down on that next time. Yeah, I'm the editor of NJ Spotlight. And for those who don't know NJ Spotlight, we're an online news policy site, basically, news and policy site. We're going on 6 years now. I can't believe it, but last year was our 5th year anniversary. And essentially, we 4 of us co-founded the site 6 years ago, when you probably heard about all the layoffs and the many layoffs that were going on in newspapers. Some of our, 2 of our co-founders took buyouts from the Star-Ledger. They had been there many years and covering their areas, and we saw that nobody was being left in Trenton to cover any policy things. So we thought this would be a good, in fact, there really was, almost for a while, there was really almost no one down in Trenton, none of the reporters. They've built itself up a little bit more since then, but still, as you probably know, the whole news industry is going through a huge upheaval. It's still going through an upheaval. In fact, it's going to go through another upheaval. We're still, the business model is broken for news, and that's what really is the problem. And recently there were a bunch of venture capital backed sites that came up, and now the venture capitalists want money and they're not finding money. And Facebook is replacing what most people, that's how they're getting a lot of news now, but you're turning over your future to Facebook. So it's a big issue. So meanwhile, we're just trying to do our thing, covering New Jersey statewide and focusing mostly on policy. The major issues, and we have people here that cover it, are energy and the environment, education, public finance, health, and we have our data specialist here as well. In addition to that, we publish every day. So in our URL, if you don't know it, is www.njspotlight.com. And in addition to that, we do a lot of this kind of thing, roundtables. We can get, on policy subjects. We do webinars. We do data collection. One of our biggest things this year, we did it last year for the first time. We're going to do it again this year, partnering with NJPAC, with the Performing Arts Center, in October or late October, early November. We're doing NJ Spotlight, a big conference on NJ Spotlight on cities. It was a big success last year. We got a lot of fabulous speakers, and this year we hope to have all the gubernatorial candidates. We're working out the program now, but we really think that the future of New Jersey is, in the hands of our cities, so we've got to fix our cities first, so that's what we're focused on with that. And I did want to also mention a couple of things, little marketing things. We do have an email list that we have it either daily or weekly. You can, I was supposed to have a sign up. I will try, you can sign up for it here, although our marketing person didn't give it to me, but I'll take anybody who wants to get on the list, or you can just go on the website and get it. But you get the headlines of everything we're putting up every day. And we also have some information down there. So, and before I forget, we're a non-profit. That was the thing. I mean, I was talking about the whole issue of the business model, and we figured, okay, we got started by the Community Foundation of New Jersey, and the Knight Foundation gave us some money to start. And we thought, well, we'll see how this goes for a few years, and maybe while the industry sorts itself out. Well, the industry, as I said, still hasn't sorted itself out. So we are a nonprofit. We have a load of partners that are also not-profit, some that are for profit. WNYC Radio, the NPR affiliate for New York, and Northern New Jersey is one of our closest partners. We, up until recently, we shared a reporter. We pretty much share a lot of, you might have heard our reporters, or some of us on Brian Lair, or on the Morning Edition. We do a lot of that with them. We're also partnering with WHYY, the Philadelphia NPR affiliate, and we do partnering with NJ TV, as well as Philly.com. Really what has happened, and this is a big thing that in New Jersey, you're lucky up here in this area because you do have the Bergen Record. It's probably the last newspaper that actually covers public policy at all. In the rest of the state, there's really very little of it. Even NJ.com, even though it's a behemoth, they spend most of their time covering sports, covering entertainment. The whole game is a click game now, and that's the problem. So we decided we'd be nonprofit. We do have a membership drive coming up, and basically that's it. So I'd like to introduce some of our reporters, and they can tell you what they do and what the big issues they see coming up in the future. And in addition, we'll take questions after they're done, and after Christmas done. Okay. So the first person we have here is Tom Johnson. He worked at the Star Ledger for 27 years, covering energy and previously the environment. He's one of our co-founders. And Tom?
Well, thank you, Lee. And thank you, North Jersey Policy Network, for having us here, and thank you for coming here. As Lee mentioned, I cover energy and the environment, which often merge together on a lot of issues. And there's a lot happening in both areas in New Jersey. The environment has always been a top 5 issue, but maybe not so much so these days as in the past when they were discovering all the Superfund toxic waste sites and air pollution problems. We've gotten a little bit better on air pollution, though we still have yet to meet the federal health standard for ozone. But the environment and energy is in the news these days because, as Hurricane Sandy demonstrated, extreme storm events are no longer a rarity, and there's not scientific proof about it, but there is cause for concern that it is related to climate change. In New Jersey, with its coastline, it's especially vulnerable to climate change, and we need to react to it, which the state is doing. They've set some goals. The progress in terms of reducing emissions of the pollution that causes global warming. This debate over how successful we have been, but we're in pretty good shape because we have a lot of our electricity is generated by nuclear power plants. Half the power in New Jersey comes from nuclear. A lot of environmentalists don't like that because of other reasons, but nuclear does not emit any greenhouse gas emissions, so that makes it easier to meet the goal, which is they want to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050 over levels in 1990. And it's a big target. And so far we've been meeting the goals, but we've taken a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot of issues that may cause concern. And that leads me into what are the issues that are coming up in the next few years. Well, we had sort of the same sort of event about a month ago down in Princeton, and I'm going to reprise some of the things I said in that. It's sort of a waiting game down in Trenton these days because the governor was running for president, and there weren't a whole lot of new initiatives coming down on any topic of consequence. And people in the areas that I cover are hoping to get things done, like increase the state's reliance on renewable energy. We're like 5th in the nation in number of solar installations. They want to take advantage of what the federal government says is some of the best wind resources in the country offshore, and build offshore wind farms, which hasn't happened, even though it's supposed to have been well on its way by this time. And there's also there's a big debate in Trenton and here in Bergen County to some extent and elsewhere in the state over the rapid expansion of the state's reliance on natural gas. There's maybe 15 different pipelines that have been proposed, that are being built or have been approved, that would tap into new deposits of natural gas found in Pennsylvania and other nearby states, which have really driven down the cost of heating your home if you are among those lucky enough to use natural gas to heat your home. But it's also a fossil fuel, and it's increasing our emissions to that extent. As well, there's 5 new natural gas power plants being built, which is a source of concern among the environmental community. On the energy side, there is also, there's a lot going on in terms of changes for the sector. It's sort of what happened with the telecommunications sector 20 years ago when it shifted from the fixed line, old copper system to the wireless and internet telephone service. The same sort of thing is happening to the old utility business model for energy. It's dying, because of the increased use of natural gas and other forms of renewable energy, and that's eroding the revenue base for the utilities and making it more difficult for them to maintain the power grid, which is a big concern of regulators, given I'm sure many of you in this audience lost power for a week or more during Hurricane Sandy and other storms. So these are some of the issues the state's trying to address. They're also trying to figure out how to preserve the remaining open space that's left here in New Jersey and protect the highlands, which is the source of drinking water for 5 million people. There's some concern about rollbacks and environmental regulations that would impede the quality of drinking water, and that fight's going to be ongoing for the next couple of years. So I'll be happy to take questions.
I think we're going to save the questions to the end, if you don't mind. One of the things I forgot to mention, and I usually say this when I give speeches about Spotlight, is most people don't understand all the attention, voters' attention, is always on the presidential election and your local municipal election. And I don't think people really understand, maybe some of you do, but most people don't understand that the most important level of government that impacts themselves is the state. The state determines, is Obamacare? Every state is doing something different with Obamacare because the actual regulations come from the state. Environmental issues. The EPA has some general things, but the actual regulations, the actual enforcement for most of it comes from the state. Education. Your local school board has a little bit deciding what kind of sports they want to do or whatever they want to do, but the policy of education all comes from the state throughout this thing. So when we chose the beats that we covered, we chose those that we thought were the ones that had the most impact on people. So energy and the environment, healthcare, public finance, and I have to say our education reporter, I have to apologize, he's also our CEO, he couldn't be here tonight because he's another co-founder because he had a family thing. So we also generally cover transportation, housing issues, things that are policy issues, statewide. And what our goal is to give you context, not just to cover the news, which we do, but when we cover a story, to give you context about why you should care and why it's important, rather than just, something happened yesterday. Because most people don't follow the state very closely, and it's really a problem because it really does impact you more than your town or as much. And people don't vote for their state legislature, and we're having 16 months from now, we're going to have I think it's a little more than a year from now, we are going to have, I'll get to you in a second, we are going to have a gubernatorial race, and it's going to be a change because we can only serve two things, and that's going to be very, very important because that governor and we have the most powerful governor in the country. Our governor, the role of it, not just who it is, they are the most, everybody agrees. We don't have any other really statewide elected people except for the Senate and the Lieutenant Governor who runs with him. I mean, we don't have an elected Attorney General, we don't have an elected Controller, we don't have a public advocate. So, anyway, so I just wanted to include that. And can you wait or?
No, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I ran for assembly in the 40th district. The turnout was 19% this past November. Wow. It was a 90-year low.
Yeah, and it's getting lower and lower and lower. And people don't know, they feel that they shouldn't vote because they don't know who's running and they don't know anything about them, and it really doesn't matter, but it does matter. It really does matter. And as a result, newspapers and news outlets cover it less because people don't care. So, it kind of feeds on itself. So anyway, I want to introduce our health reporter, Lilo Staten. Stanton, and I always get that wrong. She just recently joined us, actually about a week or two ago, although she's worked with us before in the past. Lilo is, well, she can tell you what she did herself, but she worked for the Asbury Park Press for a number of years, and since then she's worked for a number of environmental or other kind of nonprofits, and she also worked in Governor Corzone's communications office. So, Lilo?
Thank you. Thanks for having us this evening. Yeah, it's great to be back with Spotlight because of all the reasons that Tom and Lee talked about. We're able, as reporters, to do things that other reporters aren't. And I can't tell you how many times I hear from people, colleagues of mine that work for other publications, who are envious of the way that we get to cover stories, because we do get to we get to write longer and more in-depth stories and really kind of dig into these topics a little bit. You know, I like to think that because I spent a long time with the Asbury Park Press as part of Gannett, covering politics and all kinds of things. I mean, that was a great background. I don't hold the Gannett part against me, but but then having some experience in state government and working for nonprofits with an environmental campaign, it's sort of, I feel like I now have a new appreciation of what what the advocacy community is doing, and there's a huge role that advocates and nonprofits do play in government. I mean, all of you know, the issues of the day that are driven in budget discussions and a lot of other things are driven. I mean, they're not pure. There's always forces behind them and money and politics, but there is a lot of sort of local community force that pushes what's on the agenda, and I think that's important to remember. As Lee mentioned, the Affordable Care Act, the federal Affordable Care Act, is sort of an overlay for almost everything in healthcare these days. Whether you're talking about hospital finance or insurance or opiate addiction or any number of other topics, there's often a tie-in to how the Affordable Care Act changed things. So we're really in a very new landscape here. People spend a lot of time in Trenton trying to get the Christie administration to admit whether they think it's a good thing or a bad thing, and I think, you know, that's sort of a political statement. But there are lots of different ways that the change has impacted healthcare on a very sort of basic level. And you know, hospital funding is certainly a big thing. I end up writing a lot about the millions of dollars that hospitals get from the state to cover the cost of people that don't have insurance, which is still enormous. It's hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And that has led to some battles over an insurance product called Omnia, which you may have heard about. I know there's some billboards out on Route 4 and Route 3 that had some messages related to Omnia for a couple weeks. That's become a big issue with hospitals in this region, including Holy Name and Hackensack and some of the other hospitals. They've sort of come down on different sides of how this new insurance plan will impact them. And for a lot of them, they claim it's going to be an enormously big deal, but that's all going to play out over time. But I think the point is you're going to see more and more different kinds of insurance products. I've also written recently about an effort to sort of integrate medical care and behavioral health care more. There's sort of a growing awareness that you can't treat one without the other, and some people get their care in one place but not another. So to sort of pull those together, and in doing that, I've learned the state has all kinds of ridiculous regulations about requiring different entrances and some very sort of crazy policy that you would think doesn't advantage anyone. And there was probably a good reason at one point, but what you find is a lot of these policies are extremely outdated and in desperate need of some kind of overhaul. Opiate addiction has been an enormous issue in New Jersey, of course. It's one of the things that Governor Christie has invested in quite heavily. He's really taken a sort of a leadership role in that. I've written about Zika recently. That's, of course, of interest. In a state where 1 in 5 of us is born somewhere else, it becomes a particularly big deal because this is a disease that people get when they go to a country where it is it exists, and then they bring it back. Now, how they pass it is all sort of very unknown, but of course for mothers or people who want to become pregnant, this is a very big deal. And I wrote a story today that I thought was very interesting about end-of-life care. I didn't know this, but apparently this is something that I think a lot of us have gone through personally, where you've been with somebody who's passed, and you have questions about what is the process and sort of what they want out of their final weeks or months in healthcare. And it's amazing how few of us, despite having very firm convictions about this, how few of us actually write this down. So I encourage you all to think about this, have this conversation, and write it down, because without writing it down, you won't know what to do. So it's healthcare is it's great because it really does impact people on a daily basis, and it also, of course, has this enormous business impact in that it's a huge cost for businesses and government. So it's one of these broad things that really impacts people.
Thank you, Leila.
Thanks.
Next, we have Colleen O'Day, who we're very fortunate to have. One of the things that we do, and she'll tell you all about it, is we do a lot of data collection and data manipulation and graphics so that you can compare and look at information in a different way. And Colleen, in addition to being Miss Housing, and probably my partner in crime with politics, is in charge of that. So, Colleen.
Yes, hi everybody, and thank you very much for having us, and thank you for being here and being involved, because we care so much about policy and about issues, about real news, and it's really nice to see that there are readers out there and people out there who feel the same way, because, you know, without you guys, you know, government falls apart. So thank you. So like everybody else, I think, up here, I have a long history of working in New Jersey. I actually was 26 years at the Daily Record of Morris County. Another Gannett paper at the end. Don't hold that against me either. And actually cut my teeth. I started at the Record, formerly of Hackensack, now of Woodland Park, I guess. Had a lot of memories as I drove past that building today. I'm not sure what it is, and the Heritage Diner, where we used to go for, you know, coffee runs, and so I've been around for a while. What I'm doing now, you know, predominantly, I guess maybe half my work is data work. I do a map every week. They're very popular. I will give you a little hint. Tomorrow's map is going to be on federal income taxes, and you can see how folks in your zip code, what they paid in the past and what they made in the past. So by doing that, I kind of am sort of what we call a general assignment reporter, because I will report on almost all sorts of topics when I just find something interesting. I try to look at things that are in the news currently, but you know, sometimes there isn't news. So, you know, it's something in the news that is data driven. So then I'll just, you know, pull something out. We are trying to do more data visualizations in different ways, because they are, you know, they do help people to understand in a quicker way, in a you know, a more visual way, things that are happening. We've got a bunch of databases we put up. We're going to do more of those. We've got teacher salary databases, test scores, you know, pretty much, you know, anything folks are looking for. We're trying to put that up. You know, and then I also do write about affordable housing. Boy, I think we all...
Only one in the state, I think, that writes about it.
Don't we all know what a mess that is? I mean, it's just, you know, it's just crazy. And I think, you know, one of the other themes that you might hear is this is also, at least in part, due to the governor not really governing for quite a while and really running for president for a considerable amount of time. And, you know, trying to kind of set that conservative persona up there. And so supporting affordable housing is not something that would have played well in places like Iowa. So, you know, it's a mess. COA is gone. Everything's in the hands of the courts now. So, I mean, the big thing that we're expecting to see this year is, you know, are the first judges' decisions on setting what these new housing quotas will be. The first decisions are expected sometime around June, but that could change again as things are moving very slowly through the courts. I also do a lot of work with our election coverage, and we've got congressional races this year. you're going to have an interesting one up in the 5th District. Every year, it seems, or every other year when there's an election, people say, oh, there's a chance someone might knock Garrett out. Never seems to happen. It's being said again this year. I have no idea. We'll have to see how that goes. But incumbency, both at the congressional level and at the state level, is a very difficult thing to overcome. 19% in the 40th, that was really awful. Statewide, it wasn't much better. I think it was about 23%, which was a record low. So it's really something that, we try to put out information about, all the candidates, all the races. We do our best to try to encourage people to get out and vote. If anybody knows the way to fix that system, boy, we definitely want to hear that, because we need it.
Interrupt, because I think that, but it's like nobody votes, and it tells politicians that you don't care. I mean, even if you say, oh, this is a gerrymandered district, it's never going to change. If people don't go out and vote, the politicians think that it's, and we had it. 5 years ago when we worked with the League of Women Voters. Mm-hmm. They were hitting their heads against the wall because they couldn't get the candidates, congressional candidates, local, statewide candidates, state candidates, to respond to the questionnaire. And they said, could you help us? Because they thought, if we called, well, we got more people than they got, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of politicians that think that they don't want to answer a question. It's work. I don't want to answer a question, and I don't have to be responsible to the people, because I'm just going to get reelected.
Right. I think they feel like they don't have to answer those questions because they are going to get reelected. It's.
Lee, and all of you should know that NJPPN is trying very hard to address that issue. It's one of the reasons that we are doing what we're doing, is to bring programs like yours and other programs on all kinds of important key policy issues to educate the public and give them the information and get them motivated to get civically engaged and at least vote.
At least
we are
vote.
having some success with that. You can't tell that tonight, although this is a fabulous audience tonight, because I know most of the people here, but we usually have pretty good sense of audience, and it's getting.
She doesn't have a mic. She's just saying that NJPPN is doing a real effort as well to get out the vote and to get people motivated, because it is the key problem. And if we don't change the gerrymandering system, if we don't tell the politicians that they are answer to anybody, it's only going to get worse.
So keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, because this is what we need in society. So that's me, and I John Mooney is not here, and I certainly could never take John Mooney's place as education writer, but I did cover education, and I have pinch hit with him for him a couple times. So if you have any education questions, we'll try to answer them.
Next, we have John Reitmeyer, who covers public finance for us, which is a very weedy, wonky subject, but we stole him away from the record of Woodland Park, and he's now been with us about a year and a half.
A little more, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, John.
Yes, thank you, Lee. John Reitmeyer, and I did spend 8 years writing for the Bergen Record, all out of the State House Bureau, although I did come up here quite often and also had some fond memories driving by the old building, although I'm very happy where I am. It validated my choices. I drove by that building. I want to also thank you guys for coming out here tonight and for your interest and your engagement. Like Colleen said, that means the world to us, and that there's an audience of people who care makes it all worth it when we're working late nights or digging through the documents. So I really appreciate the interest. So the budget and public finance and taxes, that includes $34 billion, about to be $35 billion in annual state spending. We're in the middle of budget hearings right now. The new fiscal year is going to begin in July. New Jersey also has $44 billion in outstanding bonded debt. That's money that we all owe and our children and grandchildren will owe. I also cover the $70 billion public employee pension system, and that also has a $44 billion unfunded liability, more debt or obligation at least. Taxes, I try and keep tabs on tax policy, whether that's the income tax, which hopefully we all, or maybe we all just paid. That's about $13 billion a year in New Jersey. There's also about $30 billion in property taxes that is collected by local governments, and I end up writing a lot about property taxes. It is a local government issue, but the state heavily influences whether it's state aid that's sent to schools or municipalities or state property tax relief programs. It's frequently becomes a state issue. And then there are a bunch of other funds that are tied to the state but not directly a part of the budget. Probably the one that's in the news the most right now is the Transportation Trust Fund. That one is supported. Its primary source is revenue from the gas tax. And maybe that's a good segue into some of the issues to talk about, because right now we're in the situation where the Transportation Trust Fund, which generates money to repair roads, bridges, and basically mass transit network, is running out of cash because, like the state itself, it's borrowed against future revenues from the gas tax, and it's refinanced a lot. And so right now, the money that you're paying at the pump for gas, starting July 1, basically, all of that money is just going to pay off debt. There'll be no money for new projects. And so that's where we're at right now. The Democrats seem to want to increase the gas tax. The governor hasn't ruled it out, but he and other Democrats, other Republicans right now are reluctant to go along with that. They seem to be hoping for a swap, and actually I think the Record just had an editorial on this topic this morning. 3 different taxes: the estate tax, the tax on retirement income like pensions, and also right now New Jersey doesn't allow a deduction for charitable contributions on your state income taxes. And there's an offer informally on the table from the Democrats to the Republicans to say, hey, we'll trade you these 3 tax changes. You give us the gas tax that we need to keep transportation going. So far, that's still just a concept. It's changing every day, and there may be even some news next week. But that's one of the big things I've been paying attention to. We also have a new budget coming together. So New Jersey runs on a fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. The budget was introduced by the governor. He has the authority to propose a budget, and he has the authority to certify revenues. The legislature actually appropriates. We have a Democratic-controlled legislature, and we have a Republican governor. It's not always pretty. We're in the middle of budget hearings right now, and I've been attending most of them. We'll see where this one goes. Actually, I think this year there is a lot more agreement than there has been, say, the last 2 years. They don't seem to be interested in a fight this year, and that's probably good news for those of us who spend a lot of time in Trenton, because things happen more efficiently. Although they are still in big disagreement over what to do about the pension system, which I started out talking about. In fact, this fall, it appears that there will be a question on the ballot, and we just talked about voting, and this is a really important issue no matter where you come down on public employee benefits, where because the state has this history of not making its full employer contribution, so employees contribute and then the state as an employer contributes, we're way in the hole in terms of what we owe employees down the road. The Democrats want to put a ballot question out this year that would require us, it would actually change the Constitution and say we have to make the full payments that the actuaries calculate. The Republicans are scared of that because the number in a few years will get up over $5 billion. So at the beginning I said we spend $34 billion a year total. Just the pension obligation would become over $5 billion. Right now, it's current budget, it's $1.3 billion, just for the context of the scale. So that's a big issue coming up in the fall. And on the Republican side, they'd rather cut benefits, basically. They would rather take the current pension system and freeze it and put employees in a new retirement plan, something that's called a cash balance plan or a hybrid plan. It has some features of a traditional defined benefit pension and some features of a 401k. I'm not quite doing it justice, but that's a loose description of it. And they also want the employees to accept less generous healthcare coverage, less costly healthcare coverage, which, as Lilo said, has been a real driver right now in terms of cost. I'll stop there. I'm anxious to take any of your questions, and again, thanks for coming.
And you should also know that, there are other issues he covers, sort of like, we're going to take over, or I don't know, are we taking over Atlantic City? We've got all sorts of issues besides, the state runs things that you wouldn't believe they run. School districts, Atlantic City, all sorts of things. So, and whether we're going to have casino gambling up here in Meadowlands or in Jersey City, these are all the things that he covers.
And I grew up right near Atlantic City, so it's been interesting.
Krista, when Rhoda gave a great introduction to Krista Jenkins, and who is from FDU,
Yep.
so let her.
So I apologize for my coughing. The annoying thing about this is when I'm not doing anything, I don't cough, and then as soon as I'm sitting up here, I have a coughing spasm, so I apologize for that. I want to first thank you all again for coming out. I want to thank Rhoda for having me, and I'm happy to represent FDU here tonight. I admire Rhoda for her passion in trying to elevate the importance of discourse in these issues. I've been in touch with her for some time, and she's always struck me as somebody who just genuinely cares about the health of the state and really wants again, to elevate discourse and make people aware of the kind of conditions that they're living in and what kind of solutions are being offered. So thank you for that. And I would also like to applaud the journalists that are up here because there is such little attention, I think, paid to state politics. In addition to being the chief pollster at FDU, I direct Public Mind. I'm also a political science professor, and so I teach undergraduate students. And this semester I'm teaching a class on media and politics, and so I've been really stressing the importance of how, even though a lot of the coverage really is at the national level and at, congressional level, so much of what's going to affect your life is state coverage. And so I'm very grateful that there are places that people can turn to for good state coverage. So thank you very much for doing what you do. It's very, very important service. As I said, I'm the director of FDU's Public Mind, so if you have any questions about what we do, we're basically a polling institute. We do largely statewide polls. We do some national work, but for the most part, we ask questions of the public concerning state issues and our leaders. And I always, whenever I have an opportunity like this to speak to people, I say, if you ever have any ideas for questions, please send them to me. Because when I'm putting together a questionnaire, there's the usual suspects, the usual questions that we ask, attitudes toward the governor and direction the state is headed. But then, of course, there's wide open space for new issues that potentially aren't being asked about. And I'm very grateful for when people are willing to share with me their ideas that I can potentially craft into survey questions. So please, feel free to reach out to me in that way. And I think what I can do potentially tonight in terms of trying to bring sort of a public opinion perspective to what's been talked about tonight is just point out that all of the issues that are being discussed are very real and serious issues that is facing the state. And I think one of the things that we have to kind of get our mind around in order to address these issues is really the chasm of distrust that I think exists in the public toward its elected officials. We all know that the governor's approval ratings are not good, and they continue to really suffer for a variety of reasons. But we also have asked questions about perceptions of the state legislature. And the last time we asked a question about, what people think of the legislature and the job it's doing, 23% had a favorable view of what the legislature is doing. So in as much as we do tend to focus, of course, on the governor because of the position he holds and the power that he holds and just the, larger than life persona that he is, I think we have to keep in mind that, governance is shared and people are really not loving very much about their government currently, which is unusual, I understand, because of this whole notion of, so few people actually turning out on election day to kind of change the dynamic and get new people in there. And I think that's a whole different conversation about why it is people don't vote. I'm a political scientist by training, and I have all kinds of theories, some of which are theories and some of which are, backed up with empirical data. But there is this tremendous distrust that people have for our leaders. And in order for us to address any of the issues that have been discussed tonight, I think we have to do something about repairing that trust. And I don't have the answer. I simply point out from a polling perspective that this is something that is very real and I think continues to actually magnify in the numbers that I've seen. So, for example, one of the issues that's been discussed, of course, is the gas tax and, raising it. And we've polled on this question extensively. And it's not as if people in the state are unaware of how serious this problem is. They, in fact, are. They also understand that we, in fact, pay a sizably lower amount in gas taxes than the rest of the nation. But when you ask people, would you support an increase in the gas tax if it meant that roads and bridges would be repaired and, your cars would not suffer the kind of damage that I think all of ours are suffering as a consequence of the poor state of our infrastructure, we find that people say no, they wouldn't. And then when you ask them why, many people will say, because I just don't believe that the politicians are going to use the money for its intended purpose. And so I give you, that's an example of what I mean by it's the distrust, and I think that there's plenty of evidence in the data to back up the level of distrust that people have really for our leaders. In the numbers that I've seen on potential replacements for Governor Christie, both on the right and the left, many of them are still largely unknown. So I think, of course, there's room for people to define themselves in more positive ways. But there still is some pretty high unfavorables even among those who are known by New Jersey voters. I'm happy to talk about some of the other issues that have been raised tonight. I certainly can shed some light on what attitudes are about those particular issues. We've polled recently on questions of environmentalism and energy policy. We've certainly asked questions about the educational system in the state relative to, of course, the Common Core and Park, which is now in full swing in many schools, or in all schools actually across the state, and any number of the other issues that have been raised tonight. But I just wanted to put out there that from a pollster's perspective, I do think we also have to keep in mind the difficult relationship that exists between voters and their elected officials, and how that, I think, also makes what needs to happen in the state in order to address our problems, I think, that much more difficult. So with that, I thank you again for having me, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Can we go ahead and, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a comment related to, because I ran for assembly and I learned an awful lot in the 9 months that I ran, and unfortunately,
I bet.
I lost, but only by 3%.
Mhm.
I lost to 2 guys that have been in for 25 years.
Mhm.
And if you look at their record, they haven't done it. So, but obviously the 19% turnout didn't help.
Sure.
But what I have to say is our governor, in addition to him having more veto power than any other governor in any state in the country, he's also vetoed more bills in the last 25 years than any other governor. So the reflection on the legislature is really unfair, because it's the governor who's overriding all these bills that would otherwise pass.
Mhm.
Well, that may be true in another sense, in that the Republicans have been very, very loyal to the governor. They haven't broken ranks, so they really are very, very loyal. I think that's breaking up a little bit now since his 2-year or year and a half of absence. We're finding it very interesting that some of the candidates or people that have to run don't want to align themselves so much with him. So we're seeing a little different. But I also wanted to point out about the power of the governor. The governor has a line item veto. So it's not just the veto of the bills. He has a line item veto when the budget comes to him, and he can just, and then you have to go over that veto to get that back for the legislature. He has pretty much sole with an advisory consent, but he can nominate all these, how many people? It's like several hundred. Thousands of people and boards he puts on. He has the control of, he has control of our state education system pretty much. So it is, everybody has said, it is the most powerful governor in the country. So.
Okay, you know what, if you're going to have questions, we're going to suggest you line up at a mic so that people can hear you, instead of us yelling and screaming. So can we get a mic kind of centrally located?
If people could come to this microphone to ask questions.
And if you don't mind, I just wanted to add one thing to what Lee was saying about the power. I mean, that power doesn't just come from the governor's office. All the departments that make up, the agencies, the Department of Education, the Department of Environmental Protection, those are not independent agencies. I mean, that may be obvious, but it is constantly astounding, even as long as I've covered this, how unindependent they are. And having been on the other side of that, I can tell you that they are often terrified of taking any step without checking with that front office first. So.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And recently he goes to his attorney general that he appointed to ask whether he is allowed to do something or if he did something wrong. And he gets that attorney general to say no. I mean, it's like we don't have any other elected officials. They're not independent. And what did he do the other day about the controller or something? Or there was something in the public finance. He got a letter from the treasurer or somebody like that said, yes, this is what we should be doing. It's fine that we do this. I mean, that goes on all the time.
Go ahead, Stan.
Well, that's loud. So he has all this control, and I know that he puts people on the Board of Governors at Rutgers. He creates these committees to research questions, but he appoints the people to the committees, so obviously they come up with the answers that he told them to come up with, and he hires Gibbons, whatever law firm, and we pay for it. So it doesn't matter whether who the next governor is, whether it's Sweeney or you could say that Sweeney has a few ties himself.
Right.
So is there any effort, serious effort, consideration to changing the structure?
I mean, I think what I've heard is that you'd need a constitutional convention to really rein in some of those powers, and people are terrified of that, because if you open a constitutional convention, then anybody can put anything on the table and all sorts of mischief could happen. I'm not sure I'd be terrified of it because, yeah, I mean, I think there need to be some more checks than there are, because of all the things that we have talked about. I mean, we've seen, just as a matter of course, those of us who've been around for a while, that, and Christie didn't start this. I mean, there were other, McGreevy. It's been happening over time, and it happens at the federal level too. It's been happening more and more, where, no department can really take an action without getting the okay from the governor's office. As Lilo said, they're really afraid to do anything.
Well, what is the weapon that he holds over them?
I asked one of our columnists, who's a Republican, that question, and he said, well, first of all, he controls so much money, that $34 billion that he controls. I mean, that he can, how it's spent is a big thing, right? So whether you have a nonprofit that gets money from the state, whether you're a contractor for the state, whether he determines that, so they're not going to say anything. Then you've also got the issue of politics, and he controls his party and who gets money and who doesn't get money and who gets the push that everybody gets when they're running for governor. I don't know, maybe you can answer that, but I've always wondered why the Republicans that this women's funding thing that Loretta Weinberg brings up every year, and she's really incensed about, and she's kind of, anyway. I've always wondered why these women that are pretty, feminist women don't break ranks with him on this. And they all privately will tell you, yeah,
They don't want to run in a primary.
They don't want to run in a primary. They want to have money. They don't want to have to deal with it. The Republicans you see what they're doing on a national level.
And I would this is a little bit of a guess, but I think a certain amount of it is perceived. It's a perception thing. It's the fear of what they don't know is going to happen. And it, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, you see this building, and you get a new governor, and there's everybody in the administration is sort of trying to figure out where the hammer's going to fall and who's going to be fired. And I think just that suspending that decision and that ability to act is almost more powerful than acting. And they use it. I mean, It's a
And the
power.
county committee chairs have ridiculous amounts of power, and they dole out big bucks up and down the state. And so
And
it
jobs.
seems like it's easy to understand why people say it really doesn't matter if I vote for this guy or that guy, because it's already been predetermined. So anyway, thank you.
My question is about the, what seems to be underfunding of all the pensions, and it seems like just a gigantic problem relative to all these other issues. And I wonder if any of you could give a very brief synopsis of how the heck did we get in such a mess, or which party or governors were made the most mistakes here, and is there anything underway that's going to prevent that from happening again in the future?
John will answer, but all the governors. Yeah.
Good question. How long do we have? Basically, we have 2-decade history of underfunding. Christy Whitman, when she was governor, floated some bonds at the time to finance what was then what our liability was, and it set. There was a debate over whether, under those circumstances, it was smart policy or not. But what happened afterward is it set a precedent of governors not making the annual obligation. And so it started out fairly modest, but as each governor has either made no payment at all or a very small payment, it's snowballed. We also did, in the early 2000s, change the benefit formula and made it more generous. And so there is some blame to go. Really, there's maybe not a good guy in the story. Clearly, the organized unions were accepting of that increase, but it also helped to throw off the funding formula. And we also, on the investment side, we bake in an 8% assumed rate of return each year. That's probably ambitious, especially for a public pension system, which is not by definition the most aggressive of investors, because they have a duty to maximize growth while minimizing risk. So they're not, putting it all on the roulette wheel. In more recent years, Governor Corzine, I covered the Corzine administration, he attempted to make more robust pension contributions. He's a finance guy. I think he got the math. But we ran into the recession. And so what's happened in Trenton typically is the pension payment is made on the very last day of the fiscal year. New Jersey never keeps a lot of money aside as in a rainy day fund. So when we have a down cycle, we get to the end of the year, you can raise taxes, you can cut that funding to the hospitals or to your school district, or you can just take it out of the money that we're going to put into the pension system, because that doesn't have an immediate, no one won't vote for you normally that next time up, because this bill is due, a decade down the road. And so it's become this easy thing. Governors of both parties, legislatures controlled by Republicans, controlled by Democrats. What's happened in more recent years is what's called the unfunded liability, and that goes into the annual contribution that the actuaries say we should be making. So as the current payment is $1.3 billion, that's only 30% of what we should be putting in. So even though $1.3 billion is a big number, it's bigger than anything Corzine ever contributed, and he contributed more than McGreevey or any of the ones before him. It's just a third of what we should be putting in. As I said earlier when I was talking, there are really two main options that have been presented. For Democrats, it's all about pumping up the funding and doing whatever it takes basically to do that, saying let's bite the bullet and start making. It's kind of interesting because I guess the stereotypes, Democrats like to spend money, but here they want to spend it on something that normally would be considered like a Republican idea of paying your bills. Except on the Republican side, they don't think that these benefits are in line with the marketplace any longer. And they feel like it's time to stop digging the hole to bring the public employee benefit structure more in line with what's offered in the private sector. And so they're pushing for funding, not as robust funding as the Democrats, and they want cuts at the same time. We're sort of in a gridlock situation right now, and that's why it's going to the voters in November, because the governor has resisted the tax increases that the Democrats have put up to make the bigger pension payments. He's vetoed them, and they haven't been able to muster up an override. And so far, none of the Democrats, and again, they control the legislature, have gone along with the governor's ideas in terms of cutting benefits and making them less costly. So it's really one of the biggest sticking points. I wish I had a more hopeful or optimistic outlook for you, but
Thank you. Good answer.
the numbers are big.
Hi, thank you guys for coming tonight. I think I need to subscribe. My question is for Krista. Jill Lepore wrote an article in the New Yorker back in November about polling, and it made me feel like I can't trust polling of anything anymore, ever. Right. Because there's a million questions about who you asked, how you asked, when you asked. I feel like in a state like New Jersey that has a million issues that you guys have all pointed out, it's like whatever one boils to the top first. And you said you were interested in questions. I mean, do you get to actually face-to-face talk to people and say, what would it take to get you to vote? What is your hot button issue? So how would you address that? I mean, it is pathetic that people won't vote, but everyone has their breaking point. I mean, it could be that their car did break down because the road wasn't repaired.
Right. Well, I hear two questions there. The first one really is sort of about can you trust polling? Can you trust the polls? And the answer is yes, you can, as long as polls are done well, with a lot of transparency in terms of their methodology. If you're using, if you're drawing a probability sample, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, and there are certainly some challenges facing the polling industry, the response rate, the fact that so few people actually want to talk to a pollster, and the increased use of cell phones have certainly created some issues for the field. But the good news is that they, polls done well are still, accurate. You can certainly look at their accuracy relative to election outcomes. So there's good and there's bad, right? Just as with most things. But to your question about, it sounds like what you want to know is, what it is that people use for, not voting. What's the major reason? And there really isn't a silver bullet out there, I think, that's going to explain why people don't. For younger people, I think a lot of it is very much because politics is really not very relevant in their lives. They have been socialized in a world where politics is something that happens out there and doesn't really touch their lives. We've certainly seen a lot of doing away with much civics instruction in high school, and so then what happens is these young adults age into the electorate and they simply don't have the skills and they don't have the kind of understanding of what's at stake, and then also how to lend their voice, although we've certainly seen some changes in recent years with Obama and Bernie Sanders. And with other people, I think a lot of it is just this sense of, nothing really is going to change. The system is kind of, it is what it is, and unfortunately, my one vote is probably not going to change much. And the worrisome thing is of course, we know from political socialization research that the habits that you develop, early in life do tend to stay with you. And so that's why I think there's been so much of a focus on millennials and Gen Xers, as they get older. Unfortunately, it's difficult to kind of turn the tide on those things. But there really is not, I think, one single reason that explains non-voting behavior. I would also point out that we are also, I think, our system is needlessly complex in getting people registered. But again, even in states where we've taken steps to mitigate those difficulties, we haven't seen this tremendous upsurge in voting. So that really isn't it either.
Right, registering is only part of the problem.
Correct. I think it's very much a multi-dimensional problem. And then, of course, also I think politics is something that's talked about with such great cynicism, in very simplistic, cynical ways. And I don't think that really breeds much in the way of hope for, the importance of someone's participation.
Right. What we do is we make sure that we have somebody at the high school registering everybody.
Yeah.
But that's only registering them and getting them an absentee or vote by mail. So
Yeah.
when they leave the state of New Jersey, the parent says, "Where are you living now? I'm going to mail you. I'm going to mail this in. You signed it." But that's only part of the problem.
Right.
So.
I mean, I would just say that one of the things I've noticed in teaching, I teach upper division, but then I also will occasionally teach the Intro to American Government and Politics course. And every year I'm just stunned at the level of, they really don't know much. It's almost as if I'm now teaching at the college level, basically a high school civics course, just the level of, cluelessness, quite honestly, about the system, how it works, and who's really responsible for getting things done. So.
Okay. I have a second question. You have to tell me if I can ask it.
Can I just,
Yes.
I just wanted to say one thing. So if you're looking for the most accurate poll in New Jersey, you're looking at Krista's poll, because
thank you.
she's,
Thank you.
if you're comparing with results, she's doing the best job, so.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. My second question is for Tom. I'm a president of the Fair Loan League of Women Voters, and the ILO is getting their unease in a bunch about the Pilgrim Pipeline. Could you speak to that a little bit, just to tell me, what are we supposed to do about it if we're not happy with it?
It's a tough battle because
Are we just a pass-through state?
The
We're just a
energy market has completely changed. We've become a exporter, and it's more true for natural gas, but oil's really grown with so you're fighting a tough battle because people like pulling into the gas station and paying under $2
Right.
a gallon for the gasoline. I think there is growing concern, though, because of some of the accidents that have occurred, especially up in Quebec, where I can't remember. I think it was something like 26.
was a rail car, though, so they want to they want the
26
pipeline because they think
died.
that's safer,
Yeah.
But but it's going to go through an aquifer, I think. I mean,
Is it?
I think the problem is where that pipeline's going.
Well, that's part of the problem with all these pipelines. There's they're going through. I mean, we've approved 2 new pipelines through the Pinelands, which has like trillions of gallons of pure water there.
Right, so unless we change our energy consumption habits, this is going to be a moneymaker.
Very controversial natural gas pipeline down near Trenton and into Pennsylvania,
Right.
or from Pennsylvania into Trenton. It goes underneath the Delaware River, which supplies drinking water to 15 million people.
Right.
But the economics of it has made the business community coalesce behind these projects, and this administration believes in
Money first.
expanding the infrastructure, energy infrastructure,
Okay.
as a way of bringing down what are admittedly some of the highest energy prices in the country. And we've made some progress,
Right.
but at what cost?
Okay.
Environmentally
Right.
and
Well, a lot of times with all the issues that you guys bring up, I mean, as an individual, as a voter, I feel like I need to know, and what am I supposed to do about it? I mean, because, a lot of people will say they'll complain, and I'll say, did you vote? They'll say no. And I'll say, did you write your congressman, and so, I think there's always the, what it is, why you should care about it, and what you can do about it. So that's the third part that I'm looking for, so
Well,
that people feel they have some agency, that you did it. I mean, the league does action alerts where we have like everybody in the nation or everybody in the country or everybody in the county calling at once, and then the lights are going on the phone, and they're picking them up, and I mean, if these kinds of things, you guys could do action alerts too,
Yeah, what makes it difficult is that the energy sector has been deregulated in New Jersey and about half the rest of the states in the country. And a lot of decisions about siting of these pipelines, where
Beyond
they
our
go, whether they're needed, is made by a federal agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is widely viewed as a rubber stamp for the industry.
Okay.
And it's hard to,
Right.
your battle is with them.
Right.
Even the state Board of Public Utilities, which has supported a lot of infrastructure projects. They've been putting their heads against the wall trying to challenge decisions by that agency.
Okay, thanks. So Rhoda, I know you have a lot of questions.
I just wanted to say, but Tom, she's asking about, Pennies now has been delayed. They've been really organized. And they've been really, and it goes through very wealthy areas around Trenton. And these are people who have been very organized, have, been screaming about it, and they're getting somewhere, aren't they?
The project has been delayed because homeowners are not allowing the company to come in and survey potential routes for the pipeline. But
Their money's talking against the oil money. Yeah.
It's delayed. It's not dead.
Okay, thank you.
But you have to keep up your good work, pipeline people here. Yes, keep on focusing. I just have one question, Leslie, before you join. Reggie, is there any chance of Reggie ever returning?
Yeah, if we have a new, maybe if we have a new governor, but it's not going to happen under Governor Christie.
So we'll wait a couple of years.
And Reggie is a regional program that New Jersey was once part of that sought to control greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. And Governor Christie called it a needless tax and pulled New Jersey out of the program.
Meanwhile, it's successfully running in 9 other states. Okay.
Okay, hi. Thank you guys for being here. This was really informative. I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing. So the thing I'm hearing a lot is questions of apathy and feeling of powerlessness that voters have. And I really like the question of the woman before about how to show people what to do, like the action steps and the levers. So my main issue is climate change. And I would actually like to invite you and everybody here to come. We have on May 21 a zero carbon coaching clinic. And it's an experiment. And I really want the people here who are interested in policy, because we're trying to look for what those levers are and trying to figure out ways of showing them to people. So think of it as like a walkthrough flow chart where you look at each decision point. And right now we have some expert gaps. Ideally, like this is our first time we've done it, but we would have experts at each of the sections to kind of explain like what's going on and what can you do and what can't you do and what's the block here, and to kind of explain the policies and also what people can do on a private level. And
are you sort of trying to tell people how they can reduce their carbon footprint by their everyday actions?
Well, no, not that. We are really looking much broader. Like that's one thing, that's one play, your everyday act. Okay, and the model I think fits with public policy because people feel powerless. And I loved what you said about the state because that is exactly our model. The race to zero carbon is we're trying to formalize it by first getting everybody to declare that they are in it. So that would be step one. But it's state versus state. And the first state to achieve a net zero carbon economy with the best quality of life wins. Okay? And we like the state level because it's not federal. So it's something more like I've talked to my senators. I've never seen Barack Obama. And also the way, okay, so in the team, so the team is the state and you're the player. And I really want to try to connect people with their power because as a player, you're a voter and a consumer. And then players combine with each other to form specialized teams within the state team, like your household. So you would have household plays, your corporations, your whatever clubs, your voting groups. So then we have to explain, well, what's the best thing you can do in your play as this entity? So you see all the different ways that you can play. And then you see the whole, like all the things that are opposing each other, because sometimes things conflict, and then you're trying to do something good here, and it messes it up over there, and who's going to pay for it, and so anyway.
It sounds very good, and I'd like to talk to you afterwards about the event, and it sounds like an interesting process.
Yeah, it's in Duke Island Park. I have some flyers with me, and I'm happy to hand them out to everybody.
Reswan, you had some other questions? questions, I think, also?
Well, yeah, my question was, what is the role of the media? Oh, yes, because specifically, the 20%, the 80% by 2050 bill that just passed, a couple of things about that. First, it's just for electricity, so even if they were able to...
It's not just for electricity, it's for all emissions.
All emission? Oh, I didn't realize that, because when I read the bill...
And New Jersey is unlike most states. Most states in the country, the utility, the power sector is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's partly due to the country's reliance on coal to generate electricity, which is sort of dying because of the cost of natural gas. But New Jersey, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions is the transportation sector. And New Jersey is really behind in that area and trying to address it. We're not doing much trying to promote electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles. Then we're not building the infrastructure for them. We're not giving them the kinds of tax breaks and incentives and credits that are encouraging the construction of charging stations and make it easier for people to do. So the transportation sector needs to get its act together. And the state does.
Okay, and then my other question was, but even if we did that, that's still not enough for the climate change. Like the urgency of climate change, a lot of people are, closing their eyes to, because apparently we don't need to just get to 0 or even 80% by 2050, but we have to go beyond it and sooner. Like these numbers, I feel, what is the feeling? What is the mood?
I think the interesting thing about the topic you brought up on May 21st is one of the things that states can be, to a certain aspect, more aggressive than the national government just by the very nature of the fact that the Republican Party has adopted this position that climate change is an economic ruin for the country, which isn't true, I don't believe, and I think most economists would say that. But that's a fact of life. And states can be more aggressive in doing things, but we do need a national policy because you're right, we're not states aren't going to do it alone.
Okay, thanks.
Does anybody else have a question before I go to some of the questions that came in emails to NJPPA? Do you have a question?
Hi, I've been wondering this for a long time, and you seem like the perfect group to answer this. If I go to work for a private employer and he says I'm going to take 5.5% of your money every month, and I'm going to match it, and then you go to retire, and he hasn't matched it, he decided to use it for expansion or something, what happens to people in the private sector if that were to happen? Do you guys know?
I think there are laws against that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think in the private sector, in the pension system, you have to, if you say you're going to do it, you have to do it, and you get audited every year and that kind of thing. And there's very strict laws, like the, if you're a small company, you can't, the principals can't get more money. You can't be giving the principals more money than you give the lower person in terms of percentage of their income and things like that. So I think most people follow the law.
But then you can declare bankruptcy.
Well, yes, you might be able to do that, and that is a problem. You can declare bankruptcy.
Find millions of dollars after.
Yes, that is true.
And even within government, there's some differentiation. So if you work for the city of Hackensack, there's a state law that says they must make their pension contribution on your behalf and all your fellow coworkers. We've only, with a couple exceptions, allowed towns not to meet that. And actually, when we look at there are different pension funds within the bigger pension system, and the ones with most of the municipal and county employees are better funded than the ones that rely on state contributions. It's sort of an exception or a gimmick that the state uses to not fully meet its obligation. So the Constitution of the state of New Jersey requires a balanced budget, and the Constitution is stronger than a law. We actually had a law passed in 2011, Chapter 78, that said the state would make X payments for the next 7 years to get up to that full funding. And in 2014, we hit a down cycle, and Governor Christie decided not to abide by that law. It went to the state Supreme Court last June, was the decision where they said, yeah, the Constitution is more powerful than a law, and as long as the Constitution says the governor and the legislature have to maintain balanced spending, they're not allowed to run at a deficit, they don't have to make these pension contributions. So the Bergen County government has to make its contribution. They don't have that constitutional exception that they can cling to. And yeah, there are strict laws in the private sector that relate to this. There's a whole section, ERISA, it's called, there's a whole section of federal law. It just doesn't apply to state pensions. I was just at a conference last week in Washington, D.C., where they talked about a lot of problems states like territories like Puerto Rico, cities like Detroit are having. Public pension obligations are across the board symptom of all those places. You know, anywhere where there's distress, you're finding the same problem.
So related to that, this referendum or whatever is going to be on the November ballot, I can't see why anybody who isn't a public employee would vote for it. I mean, I couldn't figure out why they wanted to put that on the ballot, because the majority of people, it seems to me, are not going to vote for it. Only the public employees can I see actually voting for that. Am I wrong in thinking that?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of public campaigning, and I mean, remember what a public employee is in New Jersey. We have so many different layers of government, state, local, county. We have all these boards and authorities, and we have their family members. We have the school boards. So the group that ends up being impacted is quite large. The obligation is there no matter what. So the workers are guaranteed their pension. The case law that's come through the Supreme Court, they're just not guaranteed that annual funding. So right now, we have a pension fund and investment account, and it's paid out of that. If that fund were to go broke, it's $44 billion in the hole right now. We would have to pay for it on what's called a pay-as-you-go basis. So when people come up for their pension checks, that would have to come out of the state budget. So it's sort of a pay me now or pay me later issue. What they've tried to do is, instead of jumping off this cliff, is create these ramp-up schedules. And even the constitutional amendment creates a ramp-up schedule to that full contribution. So it's really, it's a challenging issue, and it's a matter of, and I think thoughtful people are, I think they're trying to come up with thoughtful ideas. It's just not an easy thing to get your arms around.
And I can tell you that the public unions are already starting to really lobby for this. Even though it won't be on the ballot until November, they're beginning working now, doing the kinds of things that unions do, that they did to get some changes in the legislature in the last election, phone banks, and I think they call them labor walks, and just so they're really ramping up, again, as John said, for employees, family members, retirees. There are a lot of folks out there who...
And they're going to position it as a thing of fairness. Krista, there's been a lot of polling on this, and I've been surprised at the results.
Yeah, I mean, right now, opinion is actually pretty divided. It's not, I think your assumption that, there's so few people who would potentially support this. Right now, it's actually not true. Opinion is about 41%, I think, in favor and 49% opposed, and this is still very early on. And to John's point about, how many people would potentially be affected by this, anytime we do a survey, we get about 1 in 5 respondents who say that they or someone in their household is a member of a public employee union. So it is, I think that the reach is much bigger than I think what a lot of people would expect. But again, right now, as the campaign starts, opinion is pretty divided on the issue. It's not one way or another in any sweeping way.
Thank you.
Certainly.
I would like to switch to a couple of other areas that I've had questions on. Is yours an environmental question?
It's just a
again?
follow-up to the, just.
Okay, so we'll get to it, but let me just bring this one in. A few emails that were received had questions about our drinking water, prompted by the Flint situation, and then hearing about possibly the Newark situation. I wonder if anybody here could address our water situation.
Well, New Jersey being an old, heavily urbanized state that was settled a long time ago is going to have problems. Newark is just the tip of the iceberg. And the problem is the water companies do a pretty good job at delivering clean water to your homes from the plant. But the problem is from the curb to the home. The service lines, the fixtures in the houses, in the schools, even the drinking fountains, they all have lead components. And that's where the lead comes in. So it's a big problem. And the reason people haven't been addressing is because it's so costly. New Jersey has an $8 billion need for just fixing its drinking water infrastructure, irregardless of lead. 20% of the water is lost from the time the water company treats it till it's delivered to the home or business because of old leaking pipes. And it's a big problem, and it's going to take a mighty effort to address it. The thing, people should use filters. Because I've covered the environment for many years, I live in an older city. First thing in the morning, I get up, I run the water 45 minutes before I fill the coffee pot.
How long?
A minute, or at least, because it builds up overnight. And if you run the water, it helps a little. That's not going to solve it, but it helps.
One of the interesting things, too, I think about the issue in New Jersey is the way that our laws are structured. So these public systems are all monitored, and there are databases that list where what the different lead levels were that were measured in public water systems. In the case of schools, though, if the school is not receiving, so if the school receives the water from American Water Company, let's say, or in the case of Newark, from the Newark water system, the school's water is not being measured inside the school building. That's not something that our laws have until now really taken care of, which is why there's legislation under consideration in Trenton to require some of these things, because as Tom said, I think it's very possible that there are all sorts of school districts out there. We'd heard that Camden, right, for years.
For years, it's been Camden for years has been using bottled water. For years. So, and you just did a map.
Yeah, we just did it, right. We just did a map kind of showing that. Right, and so,
And lead was in very wealthy areas as
Yes,
well as
it's in all-
poor areas. It's everywhere.
But I think it's also important to keep in mind that the biggest source of lead poisoning in the state is actually not the water.
No.
In our case, it's from other things, and it's primarily from lead paint, lead-based paint, things that children are still eating, or toys from other countries, or makeup from other countries. Again, it comes into this situation of 1 in 5 people being born abroad. A lot of them apparently are traveling and bringing back things that aren't necessarily to the same standards that we have here. So some of it isn't water related, but it gets bundled into sort of this same crisis. And again, there's not enough money to do what we need to do.
Okay, there's been a couple of questions here. I'm going to try to see if they can bring them together. Maybe there's no answer, maybe there is an answer. And it has to do with poverty, income inequality, the Affordable Care Act and how it may be helping, and housing. And what are we seeing down the road to address?
I'll have Colleen and Lilo talk about the health care and whatever, but that's one of the reasons we are doing the cities thing. I mean, it's a huge issue here in New Jersey. We have huge income inequality. Our cities are full of poverty, and so we know, and we're the most segregated state in the country. We're the most segregated state in the country, and it's all based on, money. I mean, it's where you live. If you live in a white place or a non-white place. So,
right, and some of this has certainly been influenced by what's happened at the federal level. Some of it even dates back to the Clinton administration and the welfare reform, the major welfare reform that happened then. That was kind of one of the starts of folks saying, well, maybe we don't need the safety net, or maybe we shouldn't be providing this safety net because folks should really be responsible themselves. So, yeah, I mean, there's poverty throughout the state. We're not the poorest state by any means, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people.
We're the third richest or second richest.
Right.
But that's because, but we have some of the poorest. Camden's the poorest city in the country. So.
And that makes it even worse because we have such a high cost of living. So yes, poverty is rampant. Again. The amount of affordable housing that has been built for people who are at the low income levels over the last 15 years or so has been negligible. Most of the affordable housing that's being built, and a big reason is because we haven't had any rules. Now COA COA has no power, the Council on Affordable Housing. But what towns prefer to have is senior citizen housing. So senior citizen housing and there are seniors who can't afford to live in the state. Property taxes are high. But there's really nothing, and you can also do moderate income housing. There really is not anything that's going on, that's being built to help those at the lowest levels. And the problem got worse with Sandy. We saw people who were out of their homes, and those units have not yet been replaced. So there's an awful lot of work that we need to do in the state, in those areas.
Okay.
And Lilo, you want to talk about the expansion?
I was just going to say really briefly, there's actually good news when it comes to healthcare. And that there are a number of pilot programs going on in the state of New Jersey. Believe it or not, Camden, the poorest city in the country, has what is probably the most amazing healthcare program specifically designed to target the people that need it the most. They're not only generally the poorest of the poor, but they also tend to be what they call the highest users. And these are people who sometimes, I kid you not, have been in the hospital 300 times a year. And obviously they're using an enormous amount of costly health care. So if they find out how to keep them healthy, it works a lot better. And it's been sort of national news, this hotspotting trend. And
That program is making a lot of
yeah,
real quick,
amazing.
on the tax policy side, the state last year, one of the few things that the governor and the Democrats have agreed on, they increased what's called the earned income tax credit, which is the lowest wage workers and families in New Jersey qualify for. It's tied to the federal version of this credit, but it used to be 20%, and it went into effect in July. it increased to 30% of the federal credit, and that was considered to be a big win for the lowest wage workers in New Jersey, and there's actually a push to increase it further this year. I don't know if they're going to get the governor to go along with it.
Well, Christie, I mean, the one thing he also did was he was one of the few Republican governors in the country that accepted Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid, which is really incredible, given the fact that it was virtually free, or 90% from the federal government. They said, if you expand your rolls, we'll pay 90%, because usually most of Medicaid only went to children. So, and that was a problem. We weren't even getting the children to go because their parents didn't go, and so some people would bring them to the CHIP program. But we weren't, you know, without the parents being covered, they weren't being covered. But now we have, you know, I don't know what the statistics are, but he did agree to take the free money, and but whereas most Republican governors did not through the state, and even knowing he was running for president. So.
Thank you. I have a question here on education. I know that your person isn't here, but perhaps you can answer it. And that is, you mentioned that the state has taken over a number of school districts. So how is that working out? Is it making a difference? Has it improved things?
You know, I think when the state took over Jersey City, which was the first takeover, I don't think anyone imagined it would take as long as it did. I mean, the state, you know, was there. It was more than 20 years. And yes, you've got other districts that the state is involved with.
Newark and Patterson.
Right. It's, you know, I think part of the problem is that it's just so complicated. When you look at all of the problems, it goes back in part to poverty. When you think of all the problems that those children are bringing into the school district because they don't have the parents at home who maybe have the time or the energy or the wherewithal or maybe the background themselves to push the kids, you know, to make sure that they do homework, to value education. So there's so many problems for state monitors coming in. I mean, they can do certain things in terms of the finances, right, and trying to see that money gets into the right places and maybe isn't misused. But in terms of just the issues that are facing the kids, you know, trying to improve test scores, if that's how we're judging districts, which is maybe only one way we should, that's a really hard thing to do, just, you know, because of all of those other problems. And so the charter schools have expanded very much. There's a lot of, you know, there are positives and negatives to that. But in terms of giving folks who do have that interest and that, you know, who want to see their kids do well, getting them into perhaps smaller schools, those are working for some people. On the other hand, it's taking maybe the cream of the crop out of the general public school, and that's just going to make the public school, you know, look worse and have even less of a make it even more difficult for the teachers and the folks in there to improve things.
It's a really big question. Also, Camden now may become an all-charter school district. So, you know, people are trying to address these questions, but I think that the question is is the state really make a difference? I'm not so sure it does, but in some cases it does. I mean, there are some improvements.
Krista, have you done polling on that? How do the parents feel?
I'm trying to think of, no, I can't, I mean, the education questions we've asked in the recent past have been really more related to the Common Core, you know, New Jersey's participation in it, and then, of course, Park. And on that, you know, what we find is a lot of people remain very confused about what the core is, if we're actually a participant, you know, really what it means. Obviously, concerns about, you know, the standardized tests, and the biggest concern, of course, is that that the teachers are having to teach to the test, and whatever freedom teachers may have had for designing curriculum to meet the needs of their students has really gone by the wayside because of this top-down approach to measuring student performance. And that's really the thing that comes to mind in terms of recent questions about the educational system in the state.
Okay, well, we're going to end on a high note, and that is, how do you think this Bridgegate thing is going to
Oh boy.
Well, we don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing. We don't know.
time for some traffic in Hackensack.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they recently asked to dismiss the charges, didn't they? The trial is being delayed again. You know, we thought the trial was going to happen while he was running for president, but now it's been delayed yet again. And we don't know if there are going to be any other indictments or not, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and so, I mean, some of this, I think, goes back to the statements we were making before when we were talking about the power the governor has. I mean, so the question is, did he actually come down and say, yes, you know, we've got to, you know, put a little bit of, we have to cause a little bit of trouble for Fort Lee because the mayor didn't support us. I mean,
but it doesn't look like they're going to say that he did.
No, and you know, he'd actually be stupid, which he's not, to have ever done something like that if it could come back to bite him. But if you think about the way that things operated in the governor's office and the idea that there was, and I mean, it's again, I don't think it's just this governor, but that the political arm shouldn't be working within the governor's office, but was, you know, there was politics happening maybe where it shouldn't have been. You know, are there folks who had Christie's ear, you know, who were Christie confidants, who knew about this? Well, that's, you know, that's a whole nother, thing that would seem to be more plausible. And then the question becomes, well, so where do you draw the line? You know, where, you know, does the buck stop here, right? Or do you say, well, you know, I had nothing to do with it. So it's really, I mean, I think we all want to see what happens in the court case, and, you know, who are some of these other folks who are the unindicted co-conspirators that the
right. And Fishman is considered a very straight arrow, and so, but also someone who's conservative in terms of indicting people. So he indicted two or three, well, one pled guilty. He believes he can get convictions. I mean, he's known to only go after people he knows he's going to get a conviction from. But there was a lot of talk about unindicted co-conspirators, so we can't wait to find out who they are.
Yeah, right. Well, I think at this point we're supposedly not going to find out.
Yeah, that's a whole
something else
thing.
that's under contention. But yeah, I mean that list would certainly shed a lot more light on who knew and perhaps how close to Christie did it get.
Listen, we want to give a big hand to the Jersey
Thank you, Rhoda. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. Really, this has been a lot of fun. And again, well, you know that, njspotlight.com.